to introduce to you Bert Weiss, who's the Operations and Maintenance Manager at the City of Hayward. It's on you, Bert.
All right, thank you, Robert. And let me first start with a really big thank you to Corey, because when this whole workshop on wheels, the virtual one, got floated, I raised my hand and said, oh, sure, I'll participate in this thing. And shortly thereafter, Corey basically did the extreme heavy lifting to make all this happen. So there's that. And other than that, welcome. Let's go ahead to the first slide. Unfortunately, I'm not controlling, or fortunately, I'm not controlling it, so I'm asking Corey to go ahead and advance the slides. Some of the characteristics that attracted me to the City of Hayward was, for one, that we have both municipal water and wastewater services. That was something different from what I had done in my previous special district, where we just served water. The city's population is also about 3 or 3.5 times more than what I had been used to. So we serve a little shy of 160,000 people. A thing that's cool about Hayward is that we have an industrial and a commercial sector. It's a kind of an interesting city. I mean, there's a little bit of everything that happens in Hayward. We've got a state school, Hayward State or CSU East Bay, which is where I happen to get my master's in public admin. We've got a hospital, we've got a rail and BART and freeway corridors that run through the city, and a disproportionately large municipal airport that whose roots started back in World War II, when there was a heck of a lot of military activity in the Bay Area, and we ended up, like I say, for a city of our size, the airport is quite large. It also had an Air National Guard station here for quite some time. And then probably the one thing that most attracted me to the city was that I came from a place where we had our assets run through the San Andreas Fault, and I hated to leave that, but I ended up at a place where the significant part of my service area also is cut right through by the Hayward Fault. And in fact, we're approaching on October 21st, an anniversary. Back in 1868, we had a major earthquake here. It was a 7.0 on the Hayward Fault. We are way, way, way overdue for the next round. And actually back then when it hit, it was known as the Big San Francisco Earthquake. And then it was called that all the way up until 1906, when San Francisco had their own. All right, next slide, please. Our service area and demand, we've got 34,000 service connections, and our daily demand is typically around 14 million gallons a day. We have the very good fortune of getting 100% of our water supply from the San Francisco SFPUC and their marvelous Hetch Hetchy system. But oddly enough, we're also positioned in a place that's rather unusual, where we have another regional supplier directly to the north of us, and that is East Bay Mud. So in theory, well, not in theory, in actuality, I can also be served by East Bay Mud in the event of a crisis. All right, next slide. So this is the Hayward system map for the most part. You can see in the lower, right-hand corner, and the lower, middle screen, I've got two lines. One that starts in Fremont, and one that starts in Newark, and they're about 7.5 miles long each. One's a 24-inch and one's a 42-inch that run up to the City of Hayward. And when I first started, my director that was interviewing me mentioned, oh yeah, so we have a 36-inch connection to a 42-inch pipe with East Bay Mud on the north end of town. And that struck me as incredibly bizarre. I was sitting there going, you know, why in God's name would East Bay Mud at the far end of their service area have a 42-inch line? But that story will come along shortly. And by good fortune, that does exist. But you can see the big square in the center there where you see the Hesperian Pump Station labeled. That is probably 85% of my service area. And the SFPUC actually supplies the water pressure, just straight up line pressure, to 85% of my service area, which is an incredible benefit to being a part of or a customer of the SFPUC. Anyways, the Hesperian Pump Station that we're about to visit is there in the, I'm going to say, middle lower corner there. And it is kind of a very interesting feature that we happen to have. So go ahead, next slide. We do have the two turnouts that I mentioned, the one in Newark and Fremont. We also have about 14 reservoirs. I think we may have added another one since that, with about 30 million gallons of total storage. 10 pump stations, 7 of which are for the Highland chain. So outside of that 85% of my service area, I do have this one part of Hayward that just continues up and up and up on the hill. And, you know, every decade or so, it seems there was more development, and now it's actually reached the very top of the hill. And that's what I call we call the Highland chain. So what we do is basically transfer water from one tank and pump station to the next, to the next, to the next. And they're at about 250-foot intervals. We have 350 miles of pipe that make up our system, about 35 PR stations and 8 pressure zones, which is way down from the North Coast County one, where I had the pleasure of working for a really small special district, but we had like 68 pressure zones. So it's nice to be in the category of 8. So next slide. Hayward also has emergency wells. So we have 5 emergency wells. We can, in theory, put out a sustained 9 million gallons a day. As it stands right now, these things are truly emergency. One of them is actually down, but you know, the point behind these things, they got activated or put in place after the Loma Prieta earthquake. Hayward used to be served entirely by wells way back in the day, but I guess there was a desire to have enough system redundancy to not only have the 2 regional providers, but also to be able to draw from our groundwater if push came to shove. But I mean, it would really have to be a bad situation where both East Bay Mud and San Francisco were offline. And then I technically do also have a intertie with Alameda County Water, and not anywhere large enough to be able to sustain my entire operation. But, you know, so we do have a lot of flexibility. I'll say that about Hayward. So next slide. So the wells that I just mentioned, we used to have a bunch of wells throughout the flatlands of Hayward. And that's what basically provided the water from about the 1800s all the way to the 1950s. And to give you an idea, the population of Hayward in 1950 was, 14,000 people. And by 1960, that number had grown to 72,000 people. So there was a major jump in the population that grew here, obviously, in that decade. And I would say by the middle of that decade, it was clear that Hayward was going to be becoming a customer of one of the regional suppliers, one way or the other. And I think the most logical conclusion was that East Bay Mud would be the one that would supply us. And they're, you know, right there, a neighbor to the north as far as our boundary. In fact, they still serve some little odd portions of Hayward. But what ended up happening is San Francisco, for some really strange reason, wanted, in the absolute worst way, to have Hayward as a customer. And so they actually came up with an offer that just couldn't be refused, and that was that they would supply Hayward with an unlimited amount of water. Okay, so we don't have an upper limit to how much we can draw from an SFPUC system. They also assured us that we could have that in perpetuity. I mean, so there's no sunset date to that contract. So in theory, if Hayward, grew to the point where we were nothing but, let's say, a water bottling place or something, and we needed the water, some of the other member agencies, other customers of SFPC, in theory, would have to start conserving so that our supply could be maintained. I mean, of course, that was something that we could never actually do in real life. I'm sure that the rest of the world would build a wall around Hayward and start throwing flaming torches over at us if that's something we tried to pull. But nonetheless, that cemented the thing, the deal. We signed up with Hayward and with San Francisco, and by good fortune, San Francisco also had much higher line pressure. So that's what allows me to get that water to 85% of my service area without having to pump one drop of it. All right, next slide. And so now what we're about to do is start our Blair Witch version of a video tour. This is all just iPhone, and let's get rolling. Station. It's at the corner of Hesperian Boulevard and Industrial Boulevard in Hayward. We'd come driving in through here.
Any luck?
Yes. Oh yeah, that's working.
Good.
And here I've got Jeffrey Bashir and Benji Foreman. Benji Foreman is the Utilities Operations and Maintenance Acting Supervisor, and Jeffrey Bashir is our service worker, and they're basically going to be the folks that represent who you would have been had you been here. So we're going to take our tour and head into the Hesperian Pump Station by walking this way. And the big tower that you see there, that's a communications tower for the police and fire, if I'm not mistaken. So let's all walk in through this way and head towards the actual pump station. So as you can see, we've got 4 really large pumps. They're all powered by 700 horsepower electric motors. 2 of them are VFDs. So, we can obviously have a variable output on them. And let's have Jeffrey go stand next to this to give you some idea of the scale. So these are big, big pumps, disproportionately large for a place like the City of Hayward. All right, so here we're gonna head over to the the pump manifold control, because we have this incredible manifold system right outside of this pump station that allows us to either let the water flow into the City of Hayward through gravity as delivered by San Francisco Water, or we can go ahead and actually reverse flow and push water out of the system towards San Francisco if necessary. And this is the panel that allows us to do that. And of course, we also have it set up on SCADA.
Great. So yeah, we could deliver it in, which is our normal gravity. Gravity low would be we're pumping it.
Oh, in the north
North
direction.
pump is regular pumping. That would be reverse flow. If we were using it as a regular booster, we got a bunch of different set points within our system what we can run it off of. If we want to use our furthest northern view of things, we can run it and have the pumps maintain a certain pressure at that place.
At Mission and Willis.
At Mission or Mission Harder. You got a couple different. Then we can also just use tank levels at different areas to go off of.
Okay. All right. Very cool.
So it's this.
But if
We've
we worded
decided
for
that this is the most. We would go off Mission most of the 99% of the time. Yeah.
All right. And now let's head over here. And this is probably one of my favorite parts of this whole station, which is the emergency standby generator. What is absolutely incredible about this is a 2000 kW generator. And what this really represents is just how much energy it would take, how big of a motor it would take to replicate the line pressure that is delivered 100% of the time, day in, day out, by gravity from San Francisco water. So this is a V16 4 turbocharged diesel motor, and that thing behind Jeffrey there is the radiator, and this thing up above is the muffler. So like I say, this gives you kind of an idea of just how much energy it would take, visible or visual representation of just what it would take to be able to deliver what San Francisco gives us for absolute free. I mean, obviously they charge for the water, but there's no pumping involved because of the genius of the Hetch Hetchy water system. All right, and now we're walking around the outside. And this is that manifold that I was talking about, that schematic that was represented inside. Here is the actual manifold. The majority of it is underground in this vault that Jeffrey and Ben were kind enough to open up for us. Here's our 42-inch line coming in. There's a 42-inch line going out. And then let me see if I can get a picture of this from up here. Here's a 24-inch butterfly valve connecting the two. And that's actually a throttling valve, even though butterflies are really, really, really bad at throttling. So we ended up adding yet another feature, which is this plunger valve on the flyover manifold out here. And this is a story in and of itself that we don't have time for today, but it is an incredible, incredible feature that we added. And this is actually the workhorse of maintaining the pressure in the vast majority of my service area, 85% of the area.
So that's the end of our video here. And let's go to the next slide here. So yeah, that's our regional intertie. So we have the Hesperian Pump Station that we just saw. We have kind of a smaller version with 500 horsepower motors instead of 700 at the Sky West Pump Station. And that's an intertie pump station. So that's the one to the north. And so Hayward has kind of this unique opportunity to obviously just receive water from San Francisco and serve the city. We also have the ability to open up a valve, a 36-inch valve, that would then flow water into the East Bay Mud system if they needed water. So when that happens, there would basically be a giant 36-inch hole in our system, and that's when Hesperian would finally start pumping. I mean, that in 99% of the time, or more, 99.99% of the time,
Hesperian Pump Station just sits there idle. But in that instance where if East Bay Mud needed water to be delivered through the intertie, then Hesperian would go ahead and kick on and maintain the water pressure within my service area, as well as jamming the water towards East Bay Mud. Now we also have the opportunity to go ahead and valve off from San Francisco entirely and be fed from East Bay Mud entirely. But their line pressure, instead of being delivered at 130 PSI, they're coming in at about 68 PSI. So the Sky West Pump Station would have to go ahead and fire up and replicate the pressure that the SFPUC system normally delivers. Excuse me. And then I have one other option, which is if the SFPUC needed water that East Bay Mud could help supply, then we would fire off the Sky West Pump Station to supply water basically to Hayward and push water towards the Hesperian Pump Station. And from there, the Hesperian would operate through that manifold that we just saw outside backwards effectively, and start pushing water, boost the water pressure from the lower level that East Bay Mud delivers, and bump it up into the higher pressure of the SFPUC to overcome their line pressure. And that is something that kind of strikes me as being incredibly unique. I mean, first of all, the fact that we have as much redundancy as we have, and then second of all, to be able to operate a system basically forwards or backwards is definitely unique. Excuse me. All right, next slide, please. So just as I mentioned, I mean, you know, the thing unusual about us is that we can run forwards or backwards, but go ahead, next slide. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do that. And the reason I mention this is that we end up, whenever we do run the system backwards, we pressurize the distribution system entirely backwards. So the areas that are used to, let's say, about 70 PSI suddenly would get boosted to 130, and the areas that are used to having, you know, the 130 PSI delivered to them, excuse me, would suddenly be dropped down to about the 70 PSI thing. And believe it or not, you know, people that aren't, let's say, distribution system operators, I know it just seems like you know, there's nothing but pipes in the ground, and what's the big whoop if the water's flowing one way or the other. But what I've come to find is that these things are incredibly, incredibly unique. They're almost like living systems where they're very happy in a steady state operation. But boy, if all of a sudden you do something different where you know, overpressurized or even underpressurized areas, things definitely start going wrong. And so it's for that reason that I mentioned this, because Bosca, about a year or two ago, had excuse me, had taken an interest in possibly using the City of Hayward as a means of transferring water from, you know, some other agency through East Bay Mud through us to San Francisco, you know, to demonstrate that we could do a regional water transfer like that. And believe me, I think most everybody in Hayward was kicking and screaming, going, you know, we know that we can do that, but it's not something that we necessarily want to do just because we can. On the other hand, it is an opportunity that we should probably exercise every once in a great while, just for the emergency preparedness aspect, but just so that everybody remains fresh on how to operate the system that way. But you know, it's something that we definitely don't want to do just because. And that's it. So next slide is the questions, if any. And otherwise, thank you for coming to Hayward.
All right, Bert, thanks for the great presentation and showing us the City of Hayward system. There is a question here. Do you all have any vibration sensors or efficiency sensors installed at the pump station?
I know that we do vibration testing frequently. We had an issue the other year where a chunk of something ended up getting sucked into one of the pumps, and that really started rattling things. But I don't know that the sensors are built in. But I can get back to you on that.
Okay.